we lead in Suffolk on the local EV infrastructure, the Levi scheme, rolling out the essentially roadside charging. We've been involved with community charge points for a number of years. We've done a bit of work with Innovate UK and Power on their fleet, on their depot sharing work a couple of years ago. And yes, so that's where we are. In terms of our own fleet, we have a policy currently to move everything across to EV. That's easy, as you know, for the sort of the car type stuff, and then as you get bigger, it becomes more complex. So we've been putting in EV infrastructure into our depots in order to enable that transition. So yeah, that's really what we've been doing. I've got a team of about 5 or 6 people.
I won't go into too much about what free ports are because it would bore everyone's pants off. No one needs to go through that. But essentially, what free ports are is a government mechanism essentially to try and sort of turbocharge economic development in certain locations. Our sort of setup is completely non-for-profit. We don't have any commercial interest with any particular land holding or commercial operation. We're purely there, if you like, to deliver the free port project. My interest kind of in this is sort of quite varied. One is that we've produced recently a series of kind of reports that link into really sort of overall transport infrastructure that we think is essential for the free port to really fly and work, and a big part of that is about ensuring that there's sufficient commercial level recharging capability across the free port. That then links into available power being plugged in the right way and at the right time. So we also commissioned quite a big study to understand what the overall electricity demand for the free port is likely to look like over, say, a 20-30 year period. We've then played that back into government and managed to get one of our sites on something called a Connected Sites Accelerator scheme. So it's an initial pilot around Felixstowe, where hopefully, touch wood, there's a particular site that will be a little bit bumped up the queue in order of that getting connected, which will support the overall port operation, including their sort of fleet operations.
So when you say the free port,
yeah,
you talk about the region.
Yeah, so the Freeport East covers kind of an area, if you imagine, depends on how people are familiar with the geography. So Stowmarket in Suffolk, you draw a circle round to Harwich and Tendring, go back round Felixstowe, covering Ipswich and Colchester, all the way back up.
So for those that aren't aware of who Geotab are, so we're one of the world's largest telematics providers. Everyone probably has an understanding of telematics, but it's essentially being able to track and understand the data from each one of your assets. Where Geotab looks and is interested in topics like today is we're more the technology provider that underpins then your connected vehicle strategy. So from the few gents that this morning have already introduced themselves, where do you place those chargers? You might know on paper, but actually what's the vehicle behaviour? Maybe you think this football ground is actually the hub based on paper, but in reality your vehicle's behaviour is they're actually over there a lot of the time. So this wouldn't be the right place. One of the other things that is especially interesting is we see Geotab as Geotab for all. So what I mean by that is essentially if it's got wheels, we can connect to it. So whether that be an electric vehicle that's coming to market, buses, so go ahead in London, all the big red buses have got Geotab connected in them. Even obscure things like snowmobiles, should anyone have them on fleet. Because it's quite important to understand where your snowmobiles are if you're in the Arctic and you need to actually make sure your drivers and employees are safe. So it's not just the traditional dot on the map, we actually want to take a step further and support that journey, whether it be sustainability, whether it be AI adoption, or just keeping your drivers safer.
So being an NHS organisation, we've got some quite stringent NHS targets of transitioning to electric vehicles, both for our sort of fleet and sort of salary sacrifice vehicles. We've been part of a trial of electric fleet vehicles, particularly rapid response cars, and we're now starting, still pretty new, first trial of an electric ambulance based in Southend. It's going to basically test it to destruction, as you can imagine. So we've got one vehicle so far, and it's not...
We were talking earlier, weren't we? It's on a Ford.
Ford E-Transit, yeah, sorry, Ford E-Transit for the trial. we're part of a national trial that NHS Ambulance Trust taking part in. So London Ambulance Service were the first to get an electric ambulance. They put it on New Year's Eve, I believe. So that was brave. But
Busy night.
busy night. So I don't think they were patient facing immediately, but they launched it on New Year's Eve. And we're not patient facing yet with that particular vehicle. It'll be some time before we get to that point. And we are, obviously going to do all the due diligence to ensure that's as safe as possible. So we've got one vehicle currently. We've got 3 initially that we should have, and then a further 5. So we'll have 8 initially in that trial. Like many organisations, we're quite large in that we're spread over 6 counties. We've got 130 odd sites, and quite a lot of those will need some kind of EV provision, EV charging provision, and the sort of the capacity side for us is tricky. Some of our sites are ex-bungalows, some of them, they're not geared up they're not even 3-phase. So we'd struggle to put anything other than a 7 kilowatt charger on some of those sites. But and even the larger ones, we are struggling for capacity. So that's probably one of our major challenges. And I'd kind of steal this. A colleague in our trust said kind of us going to electric ambulances is kind of equivalent from going to a horse and cart to motor vehicles.
You won funding to
Yes,
spend on vehicles?
on
or
infrastructure,
the whole
charging
thing?
infrastructure. So between 7 and 22 kilowatt charging AC, obviously, at sites across Norfolk. Now we've got a 50 charger network, which I think is pretty good as far as NHS goes, but deliverability is kind of where we've managed to win that. So first vehicles being in operation, they are able to fulfil 90% of the roles that our staff use them for. We do have a small overlap with the East of England Ambulance Service provision in the unplanned care delivery, urgent community response, which is getting towards the sort of responsive service. So we actually found that we can't find EVs to support that 24-hour operation at the moment. So we're sticking with 4 hybrids to do that. The next step after the pool car fleet is done this year is to start rolling out to vans and team cars and things like that, which have a slightly more independent procurement process. Yeah. And then obviously, being an NHS community trust, 90% of our mileage is actually GreenFleet. So 600,000 to 1 million miles of fleet, and then at least 6 million miles of GreenFleet, which is obviously much more impactful. That's
The challenge.
yeah, exactly.
6 months ago, we merged with Live West, which is the old Devon and Cornwall housing. So I now have fleet from the Isles of Scilly to Lowestoft.
Yeah.
So in total, 1,800 LCVs, about 450 cars. We've been able to accelerate that EV journey for the cars fairly easily, with them being company car. We've got probably 65% EVs, the other 35% first. Relatively straightforward. Company cars, being able to charge in the offices and home charging. But obviously I've inherited a lot of GreenFleet there across the 3 organisations as well. I'm very fortunate I've got 3 fleet managers across each of those areas, plus fleet teams. Plus in places, third-party contract, so FSGB, Kinto, support, those sorts of things. So I'm pulling the 3 together. We'll come on to where I am with my net zero journey later. Really, I'm here from my East of England hat. I live in Norwich. I drive an electric vehicle, so I've got the best part of circa 600 vehicles in this area.
We've got about 26 branches, predominantly in London and the South East. We go down as far as Havant in the south, up as far as Shrewsbury in the northwest. We currently only have 6 EV vehicles, which are small ID bus, and the amount of miles, the problem that we have, we run predominantly 3.5 tonne sprinters, and the problem that we have is that those sprinters do a tremendous amount of miles during the day. More than what, and we can't have drivers when they're out delivering goods going to look for charging. I think one of the biggest things, and why I'm here today, is to listen to, it's been quite interesting listening to some of the introductions so far and the infrastructure regarding hubs and charging points. I think that with so far as the van market and vans, I think it's way down the list. I think they need to be pushed up the front. The car transition is, as people have sort of said, is not too bad. I run. We've got 70, 80 company cars. I'd like to think now we've probably got over half which are full EVs. Trying to convince managers and staff that have cars that's the way to go when they get their tax.
I was going to say,
and other,
so
they
benefit in
go,
kind
why am I getting all this tax? Well,
Yeah.
I told you so. So that's quite a challenge. And as gentleman on my right said, the majority of the others are affairs.
So we are a collaborative group across Beds, Cambs, Herts, Norfolk, Suffolk, Kent and Essex police forces, so that whole eastern region. The majority of the group that I work within deal with procurement, essentially. I'm part of a sort of smaller group within that who deal with the strategic side of things, so slightly longer term projects that perhaps affect not just R7 but wider police services as well. So I've been given things like fleet decarbonisation, energy management and renewables, all of other bits as well, but those are the bits that are relevant to this, and obviously a lot of that overlaps and ties in.
From a business perspective, we created a net zero strategy for business because we've discovered that the Blue Council and the Red Council and the Blue County don't often align so well. They'll say one thing strategically, the local council will say something something else. So businesses were saying, well, who do we listen to? Which one? So we wanted to create something which interlinked both. We developed a kind of an approach which would give business the opportunity to do one thing right. I think a lot of SMEs said, we want to do something for sustainability. We don't know what, but we want to do something. We said, well, it's not about doing everything. You can't do everything. Just focus on doing one thing and do it well.
From our perspective,
Yeah.
police-wise or emergency service-wise, the funding that's out there isn't really appropriate for us. So things like Levi schemes are not really applicable. Even the depot charging scheme that's out now, sorry, excuse me, is based on HGVs, coaches and vans, which isn't really, we have got vans, but it's not really the area we're particularly looking at. So we have had a lot of conversations and we are now finally starting to get some feedback from the Home Office about support in this space. Because I've seen, I won't name particular forces, but I've seen forces who have been really behind this transition, put a lot of resource into it. There's been funding allocated, and then as the next budget round has come, it's just been completely wiped out.
We do kind of like bang on a bit with government, and perhaps just having other voices useful is just that coordination piece. So sort of around, if you like, the greening of transport, we're dealing with DESNES, we're dealing with DFT, we're dealing with Innovate UK, we're dealing with Treasury, because they're the people that actually, and they've all got different ideas, they've all got different priorities. It's almost like a job in itself, just trying to make sense of what they're each saying before you actually even identify who it is you actually need to go to tackle. So, like as an example,
It's like that point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which one you're looking at?
the Zenzik project, which is about, you'd think that was DFT,
Yeah.
but it's Innovate UK, and none of this is kind of obvious. So I can see for anyone that's outside of the government bubble, trying to navigate almost like, even where do I go for funding, particularly for a smaller organisation, it's probably a bit of a nightmare.
But regarding policy and regulation, I think the ZEV mandate is a really good document, as in a baseline of where people need to be, to give them an indication of the direction of travel. I think it's about maintaining that pace and understanding how you can pivot that, I suppose. And actually, if you get to 2030 and you're at 40%, at least you've got a timeline where you can pivot and adapt and move quickly if you need to get to 2035. What we can't do is get to 2030 and all be at zero.
That is kind of one of my major worries, and obviously working within the industry and actually supporting many organisations with their transition, so many are still at point zero. Still, it's, you know, we're kind of nearly halfway through 2026, and 2030 is really not that far away. And the conversations that I have with customers are, my knowledge is nothing. Treat me as though I know absolutely nothing. How do we go about, you know, kind of getting the EV charging infrastructure in? So to your point, I really do think that we will get to nigh on 2030, and then organisations will start panicking and putting any old thing in, which for me is the worst, you know, the worst of all, the worst of all possibilities.
Don't you think
The electric vehicles are coming down. I'm sure Alex knows that, and how it's developing. And they are good to drive. They're off the road less. We're not, manufacturers are keeping vans, you'll know this, from diesel vans, petrol vans for 20, 30 days at the moment. That isn't happening with the EV fleet. So there's a wider issue to the cost.
I guess my other reflection is that, you know, Suffolk has been the first county to start to roll out on the Levi funding. You know, we're first to go to procurement, first to deliver, we're the highest number of charge points out of that. That's up to 3 years. It's taken that long to start delivering infrastructure. What we now find, my colleagues, is people keep coming to us and say, Matthew, Amy, you know, what's gone well, what's gone wrong, how do you do it, how do you not make the mistakes you might have made? So the collective knowledge we have is one that actually means, you know, the time taken to deployment is shorter and shorter, potentially because we have more knowledge, because we might do trials, but then, you know, Hertfordshire or, you know, the Midlands might do something, and we can learn really quickly. So for some companies, that delay, I don't think is so bad, because, you know, it's easier. It's probably financially for you to make that commitment is proportionally far bigger. You can wait until someone else has got it right, the infrastructure a bit better. You know, there may still be a window enough for you to deliver, meet the deadlines.
I think Neil made a very, very good point about the people in government, as to actually, do they understand, and with it all changing, the AFP are really into it now. And the reports that I'm getting back from the AFP are saying that they're getting in and they're lobbying now with government, and they're actually listening. But then, if government changes, then who do they then go to? So
Again from
they
scratch.
start again.
As mentioned earlier, in terms of, I think, GreenFleet. So it seems to me there's four things almost. There's sort of coming. One is the behavioural thing in terms of the systems, processes, the why we use, what we use. The other is GreenFleet, huge amount of uncontrollable vehicle usage, which I don't know, from a county council point of view, we haven't discussed. It was easy shifting 40 vehicles from a ICE vehicle to EV vehicle. Dead easy. Really difficult to get people to use it. You know, because they say, oh well, actually, I'm working from home 2 days a week, so why would I go there? You know, so there's a different mobility model potentially for some of this that we haven't quite grasped. And the telematics stuff, I do think, having, you know, seen and talked to the Volvo guys where they say, right, we'll just put some telematics and we'll see what you do, where you go, how you do it, and everything else. And we haven't sussed that in terms of our council grey fleet, let alone some of you guys who do different types of fleets.
But no. So full transparency. So when we're talking to organisations, it is traditionally the company car, the vans, the heavies. Very rarely does grey fleet come into that, because people go, well, it's my own vehicle, I don't want to put telematics in it. You know, company car, it's a different conversation. But actually on policy, and this is outside of government, but I think a lot of it comes back to that internal policy piece. So if you have a really strong policy, you know, the vehicle can't be over 5 years old, more than 80,000 miles, or whatever it might be, great. But then what is the time and the effort to then enforce that? And what do you then do with the data? So I think you're mentioning about mileage. That's probably done on a spreadsheet. That's probably, you know, it's not automated. Who's checking it? And more importantly, is it accurate? So if you're going to then start to report on your CO2 for grey fleet, which is difficult as it is, well, actually, what you're reporting on your cars, your vans, your trucks, your ambulances, accurate, be grey fleet, actually, how do you know?
I want to move away and keep going back to my van drivers, because I think one of the biggest challenges that we have as a business is that a lot of our van drivers, they're ready, loaded on the evening before, ready for tomorrow's deliveries, and they're taking their vans home overnight, and it's convenient for us as a business that they take the vans home. Unless, you know, my branch in Chelmsford, we've got 12 vans that we could, you know, it's going to take up the whole of the car park, and we've got all head office staff there as well. I mean, we have to staff a, you know, can you move your car? Right, if you've got vans there as well, particularly later on in the evening or first thing in the morning, be pandemonium.
Yeah.
But the one of the biggest challenges for us is where those drivers and how they, if they've got EV vans, then where are they going to charge? Because a lot of them, someone's already said about, I think it was you, Catherine, said about, they're charging up. They live in flats and stuff, and that also applies to some of the staff who've got company cars, because they're not always convenient that they've got access to it. So until that sort of infrastructure is in place, that you've got roadside parking, and I have seen it, and it is gradually sort of creeping in, but it's a very, very minimal state at the moment.
I think the issue with the roadside charge is the reliability of them. So you might drive for a while and get there and then see that, oh, it's the cable's been nicked or something, and it hasn't been updated on the system. And that's always a continual issue. Or you get there and then as a normal car parked in the bay, which, you know, or a non-EV, and you go, well, I can't charge this now because there's nowhere to put my car. It's on double yellows or whatever. So there's issues with that, in especially residential.
Yeah, we removed depots years ago, didn't we, for businesses like yourselves to save money on land costs because it wasn't being used during the day. So we went the job finish model. Previous life worked for a pharmaceutical company. Went the job finish model to save on that, having that land, having that space, etc. That doesn't work for EVs, as you've highlighted it, if you want to work the same way. That's my point about working differently. If you want to work the same way, that won't work. So you've either got to decide that you want to bring them back to the yard and charge them at the yard. However, they rely on only having one vehicle, so then how do they get to the yard to pick the van up, etc. So that's unlikely to be a U-turn that people are likely to sign on to. Then it's the other piece around the infrastructure around, so if we're not going to do that, there's always going to be a cost. Where is the cost? And if the cost is in the infrastructure, then that's where we need to accept the cost is.
In terms of the hearts and minds, we've done trials. Actually, people trialling the vehicles have actually really liked them. And we've also used data. We've used our telematics data. Our telematics data was used with other ambulance trusts as part of like seeing how feasible electric ambulances would be. And they said even with the 4D Transit, which will have a sort of realistic range of 100 to 110 miles fully loaded with patients, etc., on board, and all the, because it's converted obviously into an ambulance, should work for 90th percentile of our journeys, albeit the data was from a few years ago. We've still got staff saying, oh no, I travel 130 miles every shift. It's like, well, data doesn't show that.
Go and have a test drive in an EV car, get that confidence that the range is the range, and you know it is over what you need. And also from an educational point of view, I think it's like all of us beholden to explain that, like you said, I think, Neil, like the idea of going from 0 to 100% is what we do with our petrol and diesel cars, because if you're in the petrol forecourt, you might as well fill it up. With electric, it's like, well, I've got a half an hour lunch break, I'll get 25%, whatever it is, and then I keep going on my journey. Oh, actually, I'm now stopped at this depot. Oh, it does have a charger, plug it in, always be charging.
I think a lot of the time, so many fleets that I talk to, they're always looking at the most difficult bit.
And doing nothing.
Oh, I can't do anything because that really difficult vehicle for me to electrify. So therefore we're going to do nothing. And back on that policy kind of perspective of us getting to 2030, 2035, and everyone's going to start panicking. That's the problem. So it is all about thinking about what can be done now. What drivers do have a driveway. What GreenFleet drivers would consider salary sacrificing, and getting themselves into a small EV that would kind of work. Because otherwise, everyone's just going to kind of constantly be having headaches and kind of
Yeah.
worrying about the stuff they can't deal with just yet. Let time pass for the really difficult stuff and kind of concentrate on the easier stuff that can be done now.
In Norwich, we don't have a LEAP, local energy action plan. Is a struggle. So whenever we're looking at contingency within grid systems, often the answer is, we'll do some research and get back to you. And that then increases that lag time. So that's a big issue, and that needs to come from government, local government, to develop that LEAP. And I don't think there is any kind of short-term plans to do so. Which means that strategically we often put things maybe in the wrong place, or because we're all working in silos, there's no overall strategy, which would solve a lot of these issues, I think.
In the early days with the vans, yes. You're
Yeah.
talking 100 miles, winter, 60s, 80s, weight, all the rest of it.
Yeah,
We're past that now.
In Suffolk, we've just set up a pilot of a EV car club on the basis that it gives people the opportunity to try an EV, but it also gives people in some of the more urban centres a chance to have one to actually stop you needing to have a second car. So I think Como say, you know, each EV car club, or each car club gives you sort of equivalent to 20 cars. So, and the other thing now, we're trying to promote that through to the businesses. So the businesses, if they need a pool vehicle, they don't get one that's there, they can actually access it. So again, you know, we've got, I think, 11 locations in Suffolk where there are EV car club vehicles to try and overcome some of that. Because the other bit is you don't want the infrastructure necessarily in the centre of urban areas, because you actually want to reduce the level of traffic in an urban area. So
When I did a roundtable a few months ago, it seemed pretty consistent from fleet operators that the biggest single bottleneck was grid connections and the time it takes to get significant infrastructure installed. The will is there, and I think the point you made as well is when you don't own the land, there's an additional layer, which is you don't even actually own the keys to opening that door.
No, that's the bit that we see is that exactly that interaction. One, the actual commodity is very scarce. Two, it's kind of hidden. So if you go to UKPN or anybody else and say, I want 3 whatever, you can't have that. So then you have to make a whole new application for, say, 2.5.
Oh, they
No, you
wouldn't
can't
go,
have that.
oh, no, you can't have that, but here's 2.5.
Exactly. So
Right.
you can't do that. And also the step change, we've had this on the site recently. The step change, if you like go from, say, I don't know, 8 megawatt to like 20 megawatt, it's like literally 5 times the cost. It's huge. So the step increase, and again, until you go through the process each time, you don't know what that is, kind of as someone trying to get the power in. So yeah, I think from our point of view, we would definitely say that infrastructure, just basically trying to get electricity kind of to where it needs to be at the time it needs to be, really, really difficult.
It's trying to have an eye on the future as well. So, you know, can you do stuff that is going to support not needing to bring in an upgrade?
It's hard, don't it? Because knowing, like you said, you've got to look 5 years or beyond. But at the moment, those systems don't exist, do they? I totally agree. Because for me, when we talk resilience across our sites, we've got car parks at HQs with 300, 400 cars in them.
Yeah.
Why would we need to start paying for additional batteries and things like that? But when a manufacturer is going to start providing vehicles that have this sort of vehicle to grid type
Well, they started.
solution?
It is started, but like you say, it's isolated.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's specific charger, specific to specific vehicle manufacturer.
Yeah.
And again, I know it's kind of it's coming,
Yeah.
it will be there.
Yeah.
It can be. I think depending on what it is, it can be hard. It can be hard to assemble. As you intimate, I think there are probably people out there, but it's perhaps also sometimes knowing where those people are that you can go to and say, right, I've got this issue.
Yeah.
I've got this data
Yeah.
hole. Can you help me understand it better? So either I can use it or I can put it in front of a co-investor or someone else to get them comfortable with going in this direction. You mentioned some of the areas, it reminded me, 1 or 2 of the uses that we've seen for electricity, they're very spiky. So they need like huge bursts, but for very short periods of time. And in a sense, that capacity is slightly going dormant unless you configure the network properly so that other people can then use it when they don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you
So
mean. You're kind of configuring for the peaks.
Yeah.
And
There are some fleets out there that actually have like agreements with the DNO where they have like time of use.
Yeah.
So they've got a big substation on their site, but they're only actually allowed to use X percentage of that during these hours, and then outside of those hours, then they have to give that, you know, obviously this is a London council, you know, that kind of then has to give that availability back during peak times in order to, you know, support the other local area. So, you know, there are definitely some clever things that kind of can be done if you're talking to the right people.
I don't think it's just power. I think it is also looking at like the site management and getting all the stakeholders to think the same way.
That's the reality of it, and it's kind of, I guess, if you can put that business case together, you know, kind of start somewhere and actually kind of put that business case together, and, you know, especially, you know, finance directors, once you can kind of prove that there is actually a saving to kind of be had here, you know, the cost of electricity has increased, so the amount has obviously reduced over the last sort of 2 years or so. But there's definitely a business case to kind of be put forward in a large majority of the cases.
When we took delivery of the electric vehicles that we were intending to use for the urgent community response teams, although we had really good telematics on journeys and distances, we didn't have any record of the speed they were travelling. Because 90%, when they're overnight, 90% of their travel is done at national speed limit or above. And they just didn't have anywhere near the range we expected, which is what caused us to have to step back to go back to hybrid for those 4 overnight vehicles. So that's what happened, I guess.
We managed to challenge the assumption that response vehicles were going to need rapid charging all the time, and like AC charging was never going to be helpful. So Kent and Essex both trialled Toyota BZR4s, I think they are, something like that. And at the end of that, both had completely different experiences and results. And the main thing we put it down to is that Kent are a bit more advanced with infrastructure on estates with regards to AC charging. So whilst both were predominantly being charged externally on DC charging, when Kent officers did attend sites, they plugged it into AC charging, and those top-up scenarios, like we talked about earlier, about like a mobile phone type scenario, was helpful. Even though the assumption is there's never any downtime, they literally have a shift change and that's it, but that clearly isn't the case. There is times they're at stations and they can take that extra bit. So yeah, AC charging does have a place within, you know, managing response vehicles, so I think we've learned that from it.